I'm Lise Leblanc, therapist, author, and life coach, and today I want to talk to you about something that many people don't realize until it's way too late, and that is the powerful, often addictive role of being needed and indispensable in a relationship with someone who has borderline traits or full-blown borderline personality disorder. If you've ever found yourself in a relationship that felt like a soulmate connection one moment and emotional chaos the next, you're not alone. At first, these relationships feel so magical, like you finally found the one. But what if that deep sense of connection that you're feeling is actually part of a shared fantasy, built more on idealization and emotional intensity than on real intimacy? Now, this video isn't about blaming or shaming anyone. It's about helping you understand the deep psychological dance that happens in these relationships, because in the beginning, she will idealize you, mirror all of your values, your interests, your goals, even your personality in a way that kind of feels too good to be true, because it is. But in another way, it feels incredible because you feel admired. Maybe you feel like you finally matter in a way that you never have before. But over time, that admiration turns into pressure to live up to this idealized version of yourself, and you try to not let her down, always trying to be that stable, calm, capable partner that makes her feel safe, careful to not upset her, constantly managing her moods, and slowly losing touch with your own needs and limits. And without realizing it, you stop showing up as your real self because of that fear of disappointing her. It just starts to outweigh your own needs and boundaries. To illustrate how this plays out in real life, let me tell you about a client of mine. We'll call him Dave. And if you've ever been in a relationship with someone with borderline personality disorder where the highs feel out of this world and the lows feel like emotional whiplash, you might be able to see yourself in this scenario that I'm about to describe. As is typical of BPD relationships, at first it felt like a dream come true. She made him feel so seen, so special, like he'd never felt this before. And it was emotionally intense, erotic, and it gave him this powerful energy that made him feel like he was on top of the world. But now that it's over, Dave is starting to realize that he got sucked into a shared fantasy, and he's now doing his own inner work, and he's recognizing that it wasn't just about her. It was about the role he was playing. Dave had become her stabilizer, her emotional lifeline, and when things were good, it made him feel valued, needed. It gave him a sense of purpose. He felt strong, important, even heroic at times. And that sense of significance felt really good. And it's what often keeps men stuck in these kinds of relationships. It's not just the drama or the emotional addiction or the sense of obligation. It's the sense of purpose and meaning. It's the sense of identity that it gives them. That sense of worthiness, of being capable and indispensable in someone's life. It's the validation of your worth, your strength, your purpose, all wrapped up in being essential to someone who feels like they can't survive without you. But here's the trap. When your self-worth becomes dependent on being someone else's emotional anchor, it's no longer love. It's codependence dressed up in this soulmate connection. And when the fantasy starts to unravel, and it inevitably will, it is deeply destabilizing, and it's often emotionally damaging. So the first thing to acknowledge is that Dave and his borderline partner created a fantasy world where she idealized him as her hero, her savior, and the only person who could understand her and make her feel safe. And he stepped into that role, feeling needed and important, but also carrying the heavy weight of responsibility and pressure to keep holding everything together and to live up to that perfect, idealized version of himself that she created. So he strives to be in integrity with an image that wasn't fully his authentic self. Dave didn't realize he was doing this at the time, and he also doesn't believe that she was consciously aware of this either. This was his first experience with a borderline partner. Plus, he was coming out of a relationship that was somewhat, let's say disconnected and invalidating. So he was naturally drawn to the intense emotional connection. It tapped into so many of his unmet needs. But what he didn't realize then was that the intensity wasn't rooted in reality. It was rooted in idealization, in projection, and in fantasy, and unconscious wounds that they were both bringing to the relationship. But it felt so good in the beginning. It was so intoxicating. That connection felt so profound, so destined, even healing. But as time went on, those cracks started to form, and that same emotional intensity that made the relationship feel so magnetic was now making it incredibly volatile and unstable. Soon she needed constant affirmation and emotional support. She started testing him constantly, devaluing him when he didn't immediately give her the reassurance that she wanted. She'd misinterpret his words and his actions as signs of abandonment, and any shift in his energy and emotional state was interpreted as a threat. If he was tired, if he was distracted, or just quiet, she'd start spiraling out of control, accusing him of not loving her, of being selfish, of cheating, of betraying her. And that was the furthest thing from the truth. And Dave, wanting to protect the fantasy, would rush in to soothe her, to explain himself, to repair the damage, to apologize. And at first he thought these episodes were just, a rough patch, that he could fix it. And it's like he became her emotional mechanic, on call 24/7. But he was also getting emotionally exhausted, anxious all the time, trying to figure out what mood she'd be in, trying to figure out how to respond without triggering her, or how to repair whatever breach that had occurred in her mind. So his life started revolving around her emotions, her reactions, her drama, her crises, and yet he couldn't pull himself out of it, because underneath it all, he still believed that if he could just do the right thing, if he could just be enough, love her enough, support her enough, maybe he could bring back that version of her that he met at the beginning. Maybe he could get her to idealize him and see him the way that she used to. And sometimes she would. She'd go back to that idealization, and it was like a drug, tailor-made for him. But with every high came the crashing lows, those moments of anxiety, confusion, and heartbreak. The fear of the fantasy crumbling was completely consuming him, desperate to hold on to something that always felt like it was slipping through his fingers. And deep down, he was realizing that the relationship was built on this illusion. And that's when the grief started to set in, not just for the deep love and intimacy he thought he had with this person, but for the version of himself that had been built inside of this fantasy, the man he believed he needed to be in order to feel worthy. Things came to a breaking point when Dave's adult son experienced a health crisis that needed his full attention. And in the middle of all this, she reached out needing help preparing for a job interview, and he just didn't have the emotional capacity to support her in that exact moment in time. So instead of having empathy for him, she snapped, accused him of never truly loving her, of abandoning her when she needed him, and she ended it. Dave was upset, but he was also used to these types of, outbursts and breakups. So he assumed it was just another cycle, another test, and he fully expected her to be back a few days later. But when she did come back, she told him she'd slept with someone else, that this other guy had been there for her when Dave wasn't able to be. So obviously he was crushed. He felt betrayed. Like all the love, all the years, all the promises, all the efforts that he'd poured into her in the relationship had been for nothing. The pain was sharp, and yet underneath that heartbreak, there was something else: relief. Dave was depleted, and he realized he just couldn't keep co-authoring this shared fantasy. As fulfilling as it had been, it was also destroying him. He decided that even if she did come back, he was done. And so he wrote her a letter accepting the end of the relationship. This helped him set some boundaries and feel some sense of control and dignity in the discard. And this is another part that many of you might be able to relate to. 2 weeks later, she reached out, not with, demands or anger, but with a quiet whisper, you were the best thing that ever happened to me. I'm not asking for anything, just want to check in on you. Can we talk? I understand if you can't forgive me. I just need you to know how much I love you. And as you may have guessed, this isn't just about hoovering. It's about tethering. It's about seeing if there's a way back into those codependent roles, a tether back to the shared fantasy. But Dave had decided that he wasn't going back, no matter how much he was suffering, because he was finally seeing the cost of staying in this fantasy. It was costing his peace of mind, his identity, and his sanity. As much as this relationship had been the perfect drug for a while, it had become more like a poison. One of the hardest parts of leaving these kinds of relationships isn't just the separation, it's breaking free from this fantasy and from how you see yourself in this fantasy. Breaking free from the idea that your love can save them, that you're the exception, the soulmate, that this is the true love, that you could have had the happily ever after if you were only a bit stronger or better in some way. So if you've been in a relationship like this, where your identity was wrapped up in being the fixer, the rescuer, the savior, you're not alone. Maybe you thought you should have been able to handle it. You should have been able to find the missing piece, to figure it out, fix it, and finally bring this fantasy into reality. But it was always destined to collapse because it was built on projection, performance, unmet needs, yours and theirs. So if you're ready to step out of the illusion and reintegrate into reality, just know that it's not an easy process. It requires you to ask yourself the tough questions and to be brutally honest with yourself. And if you need help with this, please consider reaching out to a therapist in your area or joining my men's group coaching program that I linked in the description section of this video. If you found this content helpful, please take a moment to like, comment, share, subscribe, and to learn more about BPD Relationships, just click on the link above.